This will probably be one of the fastest deck profiles as I do, as today we're going to be talking about Flushbrush Rosilia, the fantastic lyrical promo Vanguard for the current format of Cardfight Vanguard Divine Z. Flushbrush Rosilia is an interesting Vanguard at that. This is the vanilla girl for lyrical, and if you guys don't know what that means, this deck is all normal units and orders. Yep, there's no effects in here. Outside of the ride line and maybe like what other card, there are no effect skills in here. The Vanguard locks you out of that to give you a powerful combo for the deck or give you additional defenses for this deck. It's a very interesting take on it. It's going to be exciting to see the discussion that comes from this deck or what people are doing with it as Lyrical continues to get more support throughout the years, and we'll hopefully see where this deck goes. I think this deck was really fun to play. It's definitely not like the best by any circumstances, but I do think it is something to talk about. You know, I feel like all decks deserve the chance to get some shine on it or to be showcased a little bit, and I want to talk about this one. I don't see a lot of discussions around it outside of like a couple of videos for it, but We'll see what will happen with this deck. I just want to go ahead and get ready to talk about it, but before I do, you guys know what's coming next. If you enjoy seeing content like this, you make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Do not forget to hit the notification bell so you will always see my newest videos coming out. Alright y'all ready for this deck? Here it goes. This is going to be the ride line for my Flushbrush Rosilia, which is the Willista ride line. Now the Willista ride line is important for this deck as it's going to set up your soul and set up you with a very powerful order to get your plays going. Thanks to the ability of the Willista ride line, we were able to compress our deck a little bit, draw some additional cards, and set up for our Froselia turn. Now, as I've stated before, Froselia will lock you out of all of your effects once you hit her on the grade 3. Therefore, it's very important that we set up in the early game so when we do go into her, we were able to explode with this deck as much as possible. There aren't any other better ride lines for this deck except Willista, and I'm explaining why later once I get to the gem card. However, I will just say it's very important that you do play this ride line in this deck because it's the only way to get your Vanguard live as soon as possible. Now for the girl of the hour, here she is. It is 3 copies of Flushbrush Rosilia. Now Froselia is making a debut on my channel, so we have to read all of her effects. She has 4 of them, and this states: Continuous Vanguard Circle. You cannot call unit cards with Continuous Act or Auto ability. Cannot call to Guardian Circle 2. Continuous Vanguard Circle. All of the units on your Guardian Circle get 5,000 shield. If you play an order this turn, all of your front units get power plus 5,000. Act Vanguard Circle once per turn, cost Soul Blast 1 and Energy Blast 2. Look at the top 7 cards of your deck. Choose up to 2 unit cards from among them, call them the Rear Guard Circle. Choose up to 1 order card from among them, reveal and put into your hand, shuffle the deck. Auto Vanguard Circle when this unit attacks, counter blast 1. Choose one of your rear guards and stand it. If your drop has 5 or more order cards with different card names, choose up to 2 rear guards instead of 1. Froselia is as simple as it can get. This card locks you out of units with effect abilities and then gives additional 5k power and shields everything that you have in hand. Her secondary ability to Soul Blast 1, Energy Blast 2 to compress your deck via 3 cards is very impressive actually. They're putting a lot of pressure on this card for it to be strong because it forces the player to be a strong player in terms of piloting this deck. You have to be able to know what orders to play, draw into the right orders. You want the strongest of normal units that we have access to in Standard, which unfortunately is not a lot, but it exists for this deck, right? And then you want to be able to make sure you're paying attention to those orders because you want to be able to do 5 attacks. This is a 5 attack aggro beatdown deck. It's not looking to play the long game at all. You just want to set up your drop zone for those orders by discarding them, winding up, or activating them defensively speaking or on your turn, and then go into Froselia every single turn, swing for those 5 attacks with Persona and that additional buff to make your Vanguard turn scary. I'm going to go ahead and showcase them all at once, but for our non-effect units, it is everything from the Marlene start deck you got. Those cards finally have use now. I'm playing a total of 10 grade 2s, and then I believe I'm playing a total of 10 grade 1s. Yes, I am, and they're all right here. Now in this deck, you're not allowed to play effect units, so I just went ahead and grabbed all the units that I could find that were normal to shield, and this is what I came out to. I'm aware that some people do play the grade 3 Adriana set this way when you get the power effect from your Vanguard when it gets shield. That's perfectly fine, but a key note about this deck is the fact that outside of your Vanguard, you generate no card advantage, and sometimes you can do top 7 check and then whiff on it because you do a lot of compression already from your ride line, your Vanguard's ability after a while. Therefore, you want to make sure that you're able to call out units that can defend you or intercept for you in this case, and units that have the ability to boost. I think that playing Adriana is perfectly fine. You can definitely cut out 2 copies of the grade 2s. You need the grade 1s because you want to start dropping them in the early game as soon as possible, so that this way you are doing 3 attacks every single turn. That's the goal of this deck. You want to do 3 attacks every single turn since you hit grade 1 and up, because playing a long game for this deck, it really is bad. It gets worse over time, which is why it's just, in my opinion, best to play as many units with shield in this deck. You can intercept with them. Your Vanguard will be able to play 5,000 power shield to it. Fun fact, if you play a Blitz order, that will go ahead and activate her 5k front row ability, which is very important, I forgot to mention, which means that your shield value just got a lot better. I think it's just more important to play shields in this deck than it is to get the additional extra aggression, because if you're playing your early game correctly, that shouldn't be a problem for you by the time you hit grade 3 anyway. Now for orders in this deck, I'm playing 2 copies of Vibrant Symphony. The strongest Blitz order you have in this deck, Vibrant Symphony, will give you additional 30k power if your Vanguard already took 1 hit. This is huge because combine that with Froselia's ability to get 5k power additional to herself. So this essentially puts you at 48k off of 1 shield. That's pretty huge. A lot of units, especially on first turn grade 3, or sometimes even second, still can't get past that. It gives your Vanguard a break on one of the attacks and essentially counts itself as a PG against them. Next up, I play 2 copies of Unseeable Exterior. Now, in terms of Blitz orders, is a personal choice. I actually like the new grade 1 Blitz order that just came out because we just got Harry and Night Rose at the time making this video, which means we're going to see a lot of G decks. But I'm playing Unseeable Exterior because it's very strong in the early game when you haven't gotten a chance to set up your board properly, or in the late game when you are intercepting with your units and you need to open up those circles from the effects to gain the additional shield here. Now, because their Stride decks are going to exist, or because we have new support coming out for decks that can superior ride on the Vanguard circle, this card actually becomes very, very strong in terms of giving that additional shield, but it's not hard to get the additional defense from the card combined with the Froselia bonus as well as your intercepts. You've got a lot of shield value in these Blitz orders. I have it in another deck, but this is 1 copy of Elementaria. It's the only perfect guard you can play in the deck because it is a Blitz order, which means it is mandatory for this deck because it's the only Sentinel you're going to have access to throughout the entirety of the game. For my orders, I play 2 copies of Harmonious Offshoot. For our orders during our turn, we just want as aggressive orders as we can possibly get for Lyrical. I think that when I see people experimenting and playing with all the draw orders, personally doesn't make much sense to me because this deck is not looking to play the long game. It won't survive a long game. I'm going to keep emphasizing this point because I really want y'all to know that this is like pure aggro deck. Like, just go drop your board and swing at your opponent, and then later on in the game, if you still got those grade 2s in the front row, you can convert them into shield value later for your Vanguard. Harmonious Offshoot is great in this deck, especially because you get Energy Blast 2 to give 5k power to 3 of your different units. We have another card that does something similar to this, but if we don't see that card, we essentially have this. This is the budget version of that card I'll be talking about, and it still is huge for your offense. Next up, I played 2 copies of Super Aesthetic Shot. The key order for this deck that we want to see every turn, Aesthetic Shot applies 5k power to all of your units. It's a skill that goes to a player, which is very important because if you ever get like locked out of your effects for whatever reason, then you can drop this card and go ahead and apply 5k power to your board so it doesn't feel so vanilla. But Harmonious Offshoot and Super Aesthetic Shot are pretty much the same copies of each other. Harmonious is the budget version of this one, and it's the key card you play to make sure that you maximize the full aggression on your offense combined with Froselia's 5k power bonus. Next up, I play 1 copy of Crossing Lumerays. This is the key card of this deck. Crossing Lumerays has 2 abilities, but the second one is irrelevant because you're not going to ever take advantage of it. It's the first one that matters. During this fight, this card is regarded as True Heart Ruby Everlasting Sapphire. You want to know why that's huge? Because this card counts itself as 3 different orders. That means that by the time you go into grade 3 after discarding or using a Blitz order to protect yourself, you should have all 5 in there, and on your first turn you can swing for 5 attacks with ridiculously good numbers against 10k Vanguard. That's fantastic for this deck. It boosts up your consistency a lot. This 1 card puts in a lot of work, and because it's searchable, we're going to have access to it in the early game to take advantage of it to boost our card advantage even more. For my last Regalia's piece, I am playing 1 copy of Gradius Grottle. I know a lot of people I've seen, they play Radiance Caliburn or one of the defense orders, but I'm playing Gradius Grottle in this deck because Persona Riding is huge for this deck. The additional 10k buff on top of the 5k buff gives 15k to your front row. It's an order, so you get to activate, your Vanguard's ability for that. And then also the Persona Ride gives additional draw, which means our card advantage gets better, and we have the Froselia effect on top of that. So Gradius Grottle to me is just a very solid option. If you don't like this one, you can play Radiance Caliburn, or you can play Twin Cast. When I see those in this deck, those are also fantastic options. But if you're looking for a budget variation or something else to play outside of this, I would just play Gradius Grottle, but I do think it has a good value in this deck because Persona Riding is awesome. Now for my triggers, my trigger line is going to look a little funny, but for this deck it makes sense. I am playing a total of 7 draw triggers. 1 copy of the Lyrical OT. I am playing a total of 4 criticals, and then to wrap it all off, I am playing 4 generic heals. Again, keep this in mind, Froselia does not allow you to call units with effects to the Guardian Circle, so I'm not allowed to play the fronts that gain shield or the draws that gain shield. I can't play the effect crits because they have an ability on them. You are stuck with generic stuff. I am playing a total of 7 draws in this deck because this deck, in terms of aggression, I already play it very aggressively by filling up my front row with grade 1s, calling everything out that I can on my first grade 2 turn, and that eats away at your hand a lot because this deck naturally is aggressive. Hitting draw triggers offensively or defensively is fantastic for this deck because the draw triggers already count as 10k shield once you hop onto Froselia, and then your heals and your crits count as 20k shield. So that makes up for that, right? And then if you play an order, your Vanguard's up 5k, so these cards essentially become 15k shields on top of that. I feel like 7 draws was great. It makes up for the card advantage issue of this deck. You already max out 5 attacks every single turn. You know, if you hit a crit at the right time, it is impactful, but unfortunately this deck needs as much consistency bonus as it can get. If anything, you can take out 1 of the draws or, you know, 2 of them to put in 2 more crits. However, you still need to prioritize drawing in this deck because your advantage is really bad. And then the crits don't feel as impactful if you don't even have a formation to make the crit actually scary. And unfortunately, this deck, despite Froselia's ability and efforts, sometimes cannot do that. Normally, I would do a test hand for a deck. However, for Rosilia, that's not necessary. I'll tell you it right now. You want to open up with 4 units, and then you want to open up with 1 order. That simple. You want to open up with 1 order because once you be able to search out the order from your Ballista Ride line, you are then able to go ahead, get 3 orders in the drop after you Soul Blast out for Rosilia, 1 order discard in the early game, so that's 4 orders right there. You're going to search out an order with Rosilia's effect, and boom, you got 5 orders ready to go. That's pretty much how this deck works. You just want to be able to make sure that you consistently can start setting up pieces slowly on the board to take advantage of that. Otherwise, this deck will have a hard time playing against other things. Now, it does have a hard time playing against control, it has a hard time playing against decks that can aggro it out faster, and then it has a hard time playing against decks that can survive into the long game. This deck, while it is fun, does have a lot of weaknesses, and until we get stronger generic support, I wouldn't even put it on the tier list. I'm going to go ahead and give this deck a D or an F rank for it. It is unique in terms of gimmicks. I mean, the 5k shield is wonderful, the 5k power front row is great. If we get more hand effects in Lyrical Monasterio, then you can incorporate those into the deck. I know that we just got 1 card that has a hand effect, but it is not that impactful to me, hence the reason why it's not in here, which is why I didn't choose it. I do think that there are some things you can experiment with. You know, you have up until grade 3, which is 2 turns of being on grade 1 and 2 to play effect units. If they're effect units that can, you know, call another copy of itself out to the board, that would be great. If they're effect units that have the ability to activate their skills from hand, that's fantastic. Or effects that you can use from drop zone, that'd be good as well. Those are all options to consider when building this deck, but just keep in mind that Froselia is very strict on the type of units that you can play in this deck, and unfortunately that's what holds this deck back from greatness. That clause, while it is cool and forces the player to think about building, if you're not going to give a stronger normal support, you might as well just give up on the deck in the future. Now, that concludes my thoughts on Froselia, you guys. Tell me what you guys think about the deck below. I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts and opinions as well on how I can make this deck better. It's a very simple deck to play. It's also extremely cheap, and if you bought the Marlene set, those vanillas you got finally have value. So I just threw this deck together because it didn't cost me anything, and it was actually fun to play for a while. But this concludes the end of the video, guys. Thank you so much for staying tuned throughout the entirety of it. I'm your host, Cardfight Vanguard, and I'll catch you later. Peace.